Welcome back to Misguided the Podcast. I'm Matthew Facciani, and today I'm excited to share a conversation with Melanie Tracek King, an educator, science communicator, and the creator of the platform Thinking is Power. I really appreciate Melanie's approach to teaching critical thinking, where she creates so much content on helping people understand their own biases, question their assumptions, and make sense of the world with humility and curiosity, as well as humor. We talk about her journey from biology professor to critical thinking advocate, why trust and identity matter when confronting misinformation, how to navigate social media, and how to teach these skills in a way that it's engaging. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you will too. Let's get into it. Melanie, thank you so much for joining me on my show today. I'm really excited to talk to you. I know we have lots of common interests and shared goals and missions and shared work. But before we dive into kind of what you're doing in the science communication space and the critical thinking space, I was curious if you could share with my listeners your journey into becoming a biology professor and kind of what was that academic background like for you? Did you always think you were going to study biology? Did you always think you were going to be a professor? What was that process like for you?
First of all, it's great to be on. It's nice to meet you finally in person. And I have your book first hot off the press. I am so excited. I haven't read it yet. It's been here for like 12 hours.
That's awesome.
So I'm from Iowa, and my background is I studied biology and chemistry as an undergrad because I wanted to be a vet. And then I went to vet school and was like, no, I don't want to do this. So I changed my mind and I went back to grad school and I studied prairie ecology and got married. And my husband moved across the country and I started teaching at a college and specializing in the courses for people who don't want to be scientists when they grow up. And I absolutely love those courses because science is so important to everything in our lives, but most people don't understand it. Mm-hmm. So I taught that course for like 15 years, trying very hard to teach students why biology was important and make them excited about it. And that's the thing about non-majors courses. Like most people don't, like they're taking the class because they have to. Mm-hmm. And that kind of broke my heart a little bit. So I kept trying to like convince them, here's why you should want to. And finally realized that probably wasn't the best way forward. So I changed to something else. We can talk about that later if you want. But the whole point was my journey into this was I really enjoyed the teaching process. That's my favorite part of academia.
Yeah. So that's great. So you started teaching biology and especially biology to people who are not going to go and study science afterwards. And along that path, you started doing more science communication work, right? So like what was that process for you from teaching science in the classroom to then sharing it outside the classroom? Was that like a gradual process or was there one specific thing that made you kind of transition that direction?
Actually, that transition was because of my frustration with biology. By the way, I also taught a lot of environmental science. With my background with ecology, I love teaching that course too. I even, at our campus, created a sustainable landscaping program where I had students take pieces of land every semester and alter it into something that was more sustainable, usually taking things like lawn and planting native gardens or green gardens, food gardens, a meadow, and it became a research site for undergrads. We have a thriving research program. I feel a little vindicated because it turns out even in a highly urban environment, sustainable practices do increase the diversity and abundance of native pollinators. So it can make a difference. Process actually was really rewarding, but also I ran into a lot of backlash because most landscapes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, let's just say. So anyway, those kinds of things really set me up for changing what I was doing in the classroom. Because what I realized was both of those courses and to the same kind of audience, but with different topics, there was something underneath them that connected them that I thought were more important. So I had a real deep dive into myself to try to figure out what I was doing and why. I finally went to the department. To their credit, I went to the department and I said, why do we teach non-major science? And they said, well, science literacy, critical thinking. Yeah. Great. Do the classes we teach do that? So we had some really good conversations about that. Finally, I convinced them that at least bio was not doing that. So we took it off the books and replaced it. And that's the most commonly taught non-major science course across the country at the undergrad level. So I replaced it with a course that, what I say, teaches skills, not facts. And the skills are critical thinking, information literacy, and science literacy. Found some wonderful educators who shared their materials with me. It's gone through several iterations. But in the process, I realized those were things actually that I probably should have known better and I didn't. And they were things that would help a lot of people. And with as much as I loved my students, I felt like the classroom was bigger than that. And so I started communicating that online. I made a website, started putting things on social media in the off chance that people who weren't my students would actually be interested in learning the kinds of things that I was teaching. So that's how I came there.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that as amazing as undergraduate education, higher education can be, it is limited to people actually in your class, right? And ideally, we'd want to share that all these amazing things we learn in college and grad school to a broader audience. I mean, I certainly share that idea. So I'm curious, like when you first started doing that, how did you get like positive feedback? Did you get people saying like, wow, like this is helpful, this is good? Or because now I've seen you post a lot of things. You popped up on different podcasts, different interviews. When you first started doing it, did you think it was going to be a long-term thing that would grow into what it is today?
Well, that is a really good question. I honestly have no idea what I thought at the time. I don't think I was thinking that far in advance. I just wanted to see what would happen. And I thought there's a lot of great sites out there that teach critical thinking. Mm-hmm. Most of them are targeted towards me, mm-hmm. meaning like they're a bit higher level. I thought in my class, I use lots of cat jokes and fart jokes and like mm-hmm. stupid stuff because I want just, get people thinking without triggering them. I love Comic Sans. I'm unafraid to admit it. Colors, comics. And so I just thought, let's make a site that teaches these things in a fun and engaging way. I was a little worried about it, I have to be honest, because especially from other academics, I kind of worried that people would fear that I was oversimplifying concepts to the point of misrepresenting them. But I actually found the opposite. I found that most academics were thrilled that somebody was translating this stuff to a general audience. And the general audience was really open to the message, I should say. I'm not entirely sure what you asked me at this point. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did. Just because I just find it interesting because it feels like there's a schism sometimes within academia and science outreach, and it's not always incentivized to share what we learn in the classroom and in our research with the broader public. So sometimes it feels like we might do it occasionally, but if there's not support for it, we may not want to do it a long time. And that kind of speaks to like a broader issue with academia that explains some of the issues we have today of keeping it too insular. And I think we can make a much broader impact by trying to reach more people that don't have time and money to, go to our classes, for example. So, I mean, I think it's great that you started doing that and you continue to do it. And I'm curious, like, how you view your science communication, because from talking to you just before, you mentioned you view yourself as more of a critical thinking communicator versus a science communicator. And I was wondering if you could explain more about that distinction.
Yeah, I really don't address many science issues. I do, but I come at it from the critical thinking perspective. And also, when I say critical thinking, I think it's worth defining. In education circles, a lot of the times when we say critical thinking, what we mean is using evidence to form reasonable conclusions. That's a shorthand definition, obviously, and it can get way more complicated than that. And even if you ask a bunch of experts in this field, they're going to give you slightly different definitions. Right. But it basically boils down to what I kind of summarize as like a problem-solving kind of view of critical thinking. When I say I communicate critical thinking, it's more of a better thinking approach in terms of its metacognition, epistemology, understanding, like, why do I believe this? Where is my evidence coming from? Are my emotions playing a role here? It's a skepticism not just towards what I hear, but towards my own beliefs, an understanding of my own thought processes so that I know when I'm looking for information, I'm not letting those processes drive me towards information that are confirming what I already think is true. So this approach is more like the cognitive biases and system 1, system 2, getting a hold of what's in here so that when I found as a science communicator, let me back up. In my science classes, nearly always, what happens is you open the book, first chapter is the process of science, the scientific method, and then like the rest of the book is full of things that we've learned. So like the most commonly used biology textbook for these non-majors is over 800 pages long, and the first chapter has the scientific method, and it's this, observe and ask questions, and by the end you did the science, and then you know something, and then that becomes in the textbook. And then you spend the rest of the semester having students memorize stuff. Now, it obviously is more complicated than that. But the frustrating part for that is that I realized if you don't teach students why they need science to begin with, like, why isn't I saw something, so I know it's real? Like, I saw a UFO. I know UFOs are real. Or I tried homeopathy, so I know it works. Why isn't that good evidence? So it's this internal process first. Then when you get to science, the process's logic falls into place better. Like, why do we design studies? Why do we control them? What is the role of peer review? What's the role of replication? All of that makes more sense when you realize what we're trying to do is correct for our individual biases and limitations.
Right. Yeah, I love that, because sometimes I get frustrated when I see people trying to debunk or combat misinformation, broadly speaking, and they focus so much on the details of the argument and the logical fallacies or something. And I think that's all important, but you also need to understand where people are coming from and why they might have an incentive to believe something and why that anecdote is so powerful. And if we're aware of our social and psychological biases, then when we equip that with media literacy, critical thinking skills, that protects us most robustly against misinformation, I think. I think you need both components. It's one thing to have the skills, like just for like information skills, and then there's the psychological skills. Like, I feel like it's all part of the same umbrella of critical thinking. And it kind of seems like that's how you approach it too. It's not just like, here's how you, fact check something, but it's also like, here are the psychological biases that we all have, and here's how you fact check something.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't stop and question whether something is true, then you're never going to check. And so, like, fact-checking skills are great, but if you don't realize that you're more likely to fall for misinformation that confirms your existing beliefs or triggers strong emotions, or you hear repeat, if you don't know why you might fall for misinformation, then you're not going to check. And so, yes, it is a yes and. Mm-hmm. But it's this independent, like, I hear a lot of talk on, I think I'm probably, the comment sections may have jaded me a bit in terms of what people think. But there's a lot of like, oh, I'm an independent thinker. Well, no one is truly an independent thinker. But even let's say that what you mean by that is taking personal responsibility for your beliefs, then you need to know how you got there and why you might want to believe that. And then have the skills and strategies to be able to question that and evaluate evidence to come to a more reliable conclusion and not just the one that you wanted to believe.
Yeah, and I think there's even some vulnerabilities in identifying as a independent thinker sometimes, because if you're so confident that you're always thinking independently and critically, you lose any kind of humility that maybe you might be wrong about something sometimes, because you're like, well, I'm an independent thinker, therefore I'm not going to be biased. And that creates such a large susceptibility to bias. So I always think that's interesting, like the idea of label, like presenting your own label. And I'm curious your thoughts on that too, because like you're teaching critical thinking, but it doesn't seem like you're making it like part of people's identities, that it's like something that they can accomplish. It's like a constant gradual process, a self-correcting process too, that you're always monitoring your own biases, as opposed to like, all right, I learned these skills, now I'm done, I don't have to worry about being biased anymore.
I don't know about you, because, on social media, those who self-identify as critical thinkers, skeptics, they are oftentimes the hardest to reach. Mm-hmm. When you think that you've arrived at a conclusion through a process like critical thinking, then you may have more confidence in that conclusion, as opposed to realizing that part of the process of critical thinking requires the humility to recognize that you might be wrong and to monitor your own thought processes. So yeah, the identity piece is really important. I mean, we know beliefs can be attached to people's identities, and when they are, they can be really difficult to dislodge. But I do think that the identity label of critical thinker can sometimes interfere with the actual process. of critical thinking.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, that's something that I've kind of always wanted to study, and I haven't gotten around to it because I have studied political identities and different social identities for how they process impacts how we process information. But the idea of like a critical thinking identity is interesting to me because it's like, yeah, like I've been saying, like we're both saying, if you're so fixed on this idea that like I am a critical thinker, therefore I've arrived at this conclusion purely through logic, it's just it's such an incomplete understanding of it. But it's incomplete because you're affirming those meanings associated with that critical thinking identity. And this kind of like you get in this vicious feedback loop. So it can be really challenging, yeah, to reach someone.
I want you to do that research.
Yeah, I should. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, maybe we both could do it. We'll do some study or something. I think that'd be really fun.
I think the comments of social media are probably ripe for...
Yeah, we could just look at existing comments and do some kind of a sentiment analysis or something. But yeah, I mean, so do you read your comments a lot? Like, I'm just curious, like your process of a public social media person. How do you navigate that with studying something that can be evoke strong emotions in people?
I really struggle with this, and I'm going to say just outright that I know what probably I should be doing, and I know what I actually do, and I probably try to justify to myself what I'm actually doing. So I, from the very beginning, wanted my site. So my biggest social media site is Facebook. I wanted very much for the site to be a place where people could learn. I kind of viewed it as an extension of my classroom, where people could ask questions, where they could have productive conversations. And I try very much to model that as well. So if somebody makes a comment, I may try and engage in a way to varying degrees, and we can talk about this more if you like. But I definitely, like, it doesn't take very many trolls to pollute the entire comment section to the point where it is no longer a place where people feel safe to ask questions. It turns into a dunk fest and people are mocking each other. And so it's a line that I try and walk between my own mental health and creating a space where I think is useful for others. I do have a couple of people who help me moderate comments, particularly on Facebook. And mostly what they'll do, I take a lot of personal abuse. And so oftentimes they'll get rid of those comments without me seeing them. And I know that because occasionally I see those comments anyway. And then I realize how grateful I am to have them. So yeah, it's a hard thing.
Yeah, it is definitely a hard thing because you want to be receptive to feedback and, you know, engage with the community. That's our whole thing is science communication. And then, yeah, it's like this unfortunate side effect of like, it doesn't take that many trolling comments for it to feel a lot, you know, like even if it's such a small fraction of the overall population or even the overall internet, you know, if you see like 5 to 10 really mean comments, even if you get 1,000 positive comments, it's like, you know, just seeing like 5 or 10 like really horrible things directed at you by these people, it can feel very, very emotionally draining for sure. And yeah, it's tough. It's something that I struggle with as well, is like finding that balance of wanting to engage with people, wanting to give them the benefit of the doubt. But ultimately, yeah, you have to worry most about your mental health and your own time. Like, I think that's a fair way to do it. Yeah, it's tough. It's definitely a tough balance, but it can be really rewarding sometimes whenever you feel like you have reached people in a way that's meaningful. Have you had those experiences, or any of those experiences? Any examples of like, oh, this is something that maybe I'm making an impact because someone said, oh, I actually learned something. Maybe it's all worth it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're totally right. The kinds of comments that pop into my head in the middle of the night when I'm trying to sleep are not the positive ones, even though they far outnumber the negative ones. Yeah, actually, so when I choose to engage with commenters, usually it comes down to a few factors. One of which is, can I reach this person? And the other one is, can I model something useful for the spectators? Because I know there's more spectators than there are the actual person. And actually just yesterday, there was a comment that my moderators had hidden, and it said something to the effect of, you're really good at talking down to people. And so I unhid it and I said, can you explain more? And he basically told me, and this is something I've heard before, it's mostly from men who tell me that I remind them of their mom or their teacher, something like that. And he kind of laid into that a bit, and I asked a few more questions, and the way the comment thread ended was, you now have one of the biggest fans. I appreciate everything that you're doing. And even today, he's commented on 2 other posts to tell me how much he loves what I'm doing.
Wow. Well, that's a nice turn of events for sure.
He takes the credit for that, I will say. I tried, and it was very hard for me to not go in with the just assumption that it was based in misogyny or that it was, and there may or may not have been a comment that I wrote and deleted.
Nice to hear a positive story in this ocean of negative comments that people and women get on the internet. And it's challenging, yeah, because I've had similar comments where someone will say something. Sometimes I really try to see like where they're coming from and see like if they're, a lot of times it's not even about us, right? It's like they're like you mentioned, it could be like they remind, something reminds them about the teacher or someone that bothered them, and they're like using the internet as a way to like process their emotions. And I think so many times whenever I see these comments online, not even for me, just reading people's comments to other people, I view it as like they're like processing their feelings in real time publicly. It's like they're upset about something and they're viewing this person or this topic as a way to, I'm pretty sure this guy, he said something pretty mean and snarky to me, but I was pretty sure he said it because he misunderstood what I was saying. So I'm like, oh, like I appreciate this perspective. And I try to frame it as like, but this is what my meaning was. And I kind of just re-said what I said in a different way. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I totally misread that. And like, he's like, you're like, I agree with you. And like, he apologized. So instead of like me being like, oh, like you're so mean for saying this to me, I kind of had a guess that he just misread it. And that's another big thing of like the internet. A lot of times people are scrolling and not really paying attention all that much. And they might just like, say something without being too thoughtful about it.
That's a really interesting insight. People processing the emotions in real time. And I wonder if they realize they're doing it. In my experience, most people aren't aware of how emotional they actually are. And especially the ones who think that they're being very logical or critical thinkers, they assume emotion played no role in that. But actually, it probably is an emotional reaction. And they're using the tools that they've learned of critical thinking to try and almost like ammunition to support the kinds of arguments that their emotions guided them to. But yeah, I do find that there have been a lot of times, I really don't want to undersell this, there have been a lot of times where I've approached people, what did you mean by that? Or can you explain more? Or and really try to approach it from curiosity and humility that the people do come around, and then they end up being some of your biggest fans.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is encouraging. We're focused on some positives, which I think is great, because in our lines of work, there's all kinds of negatives we could dive into.
For sure.
But yeah, I think it does restore some faith in humanity when I see what you're talking about, and I think people oftentimes it's a challenge to talk about these types of topics that elicit such strong emotions. Anytime you're trying... Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I want to make a really stupid joke. Have you seen that video? It circulates online, and it's these dogs, and there's a fence, and they're like... and they're biting at each other and growling and whatever, and it says arguing online, and then the gate opens, and the two are face to face, and they're like... And then it closes again, and then they go back at each other again.
No, I haven't seen that, but that basically sums up like a lot of what I'm saying, so it's perfect.
Oh, it's so good. It's arguing online versus arguing in person. Yes. Put a person behind what you're talking about.
A person, and even like voice. Something I found interesting was like the Twitter Spaces and like Clubhouse. I thought that was an interesting thing. When I would see sometimes people being really aggressive on Twitter, this is old Twitter, and then they would join a Twitter space, and all of a sudden they're much more friendly, because no longer it's just a text, fighting back and forth. You actually hear the humanity in someone's voice, and it kind of turns down the heat. And that's, again, like the in-person connection, the social connection we have with people. I mean,
have you read Brene Brown?
I have some of her stuff. Yep.
She has a quote that really resonates with me, and it's that people are hard to hate up close.
Yep.
So lean in.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. That's this concept of psychological distance that I think a lot about. I don't know if you've read some of those papers with like science and psychological distance. It's basically kind of a similar idea of like, if you get people working with scientists directly, then they end up trusting science and scientists more, because they're up close, right? Psychologically, they're right next to each other. Like, oh, I know this person. And I think that's like so critical, and we can talk more about that now or later, but I think that's like really central to what I've been diving into lately as far as like this issue of trust and people not wanting to believe science and medicine. Oftentimes I think it stems from the distance between scientists and everyone else. Like, you know, I've been in academia for a long time. I know a lot of scientists, I know a lot of physicians, I know people who do stuff related to vaccines. So like it's easy for me to like trust vaccine science and stuff like that because I know people in that field like personally. But if you don't know anyone doing that kind of stuff, it might feel very distant and you might lump them as like a completely different group as opposed to like people you actually know and have had conversations with.
Yeah, I wish I knew who to attribute this quote to, but it's about, you know, the whole idea of post-truth and how that became that was even the word of the year in the teens, I think. But most people actually care about the truth, or at least they claim to. But I think post-trust does a much better job explaining the problem. We don't know who to trust, and so in the absence of knowing who to trust, we retreat to like our tribe or people who share identities with us. And most people don't know scientists. They'll trust their personal doctor, for example,
Right.
but they may not trust doctors.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's a central theme in my book, and what I dive into a lot is like the understanding of that social component of information processing and trust. And you know, a lot of times it's pretty rational. Like it's not like a weird thing to distrust someone you don't know or you don't interact with very much. And then compare that, especially with social media, it changes this whole dynamic because you can have like a TikTok influencer talking about health stuff, and they're very charismatic. Maybe they like respond to your comments sometimes, and you feel this relationship with them and you trust them. You think they have your best interests in mind, even if they may not, as opposed to like this faceless, abstract scientific or medical institution giving like guidelines for what you should do about any kind of illness. And then especially on top of that, as we talked about before, oftentimes it's challenging to evidence-based medicine if it requires something really difficult like a surgery or chemotherapy, as opposed to, you know, someone telling you you just need to take a supplement. Like there's that emotional asymmetry of which direction you might want to go. And, you know, it's unfortunate that science is not trying to lie to you. It's just giving you the best available information we have. And sometimes that information is not very comfortable or satisfying.
And when it changes, it doesn't mean it lied.
Right.
It means that we update what we know with new evidence. And actually, so when I tell my followers and students is that it's not trust in a person, it's trust in a system. And so like the system of science, scientists are human. They commit errors. Sometimes they commit fraud, but the system is designed to weed that out, identify it, because there is a truth out there, and that's its goal, is to find the truth. And everyone within the system is trying to find that truth. And if something doesn't align with that, it means something is wrong, right? Someone lied, someone made an error. And so the process results in a greater truth that any individual would be able to get on their own. So when I try and promote trust in this, it's in the process, as opposed to, I'm not telling you to trust. Even journalism works the same way. I'm not telling you to trust news or science. I think the trust is in the process. And when we find fraud, because we're going to, it's actually a sign the system is working.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting idea, especially merging it with the social and psychological component of trust. Because it's like, on the one hand, you're teaching this process of science and how we can trust it based on this self-correcting nature. But then on top of it, it helps to actually know scientists too. So it's like, on the one hand, you're saying like, okay, it doesn't matter so much about personally trusting scientists. But then if you don't know any scientists, it's easy to just be like, well, all those people are in their ivory towers. They're all corrupt. Like they all are in it for the money. And especially if you don't even know like how a bunch of scientists are not making a bunch of money, which I think is another thing that a lot of people don't realize, that scientists, professors are actually not paid a whole lot. CEOs make a ton of money, and the big college administrators and presidents make a ton of money. And it's like somehow there's this like, if you don't understand that world because you're not in it, it's easy to just kind of lump all those people together.
I always ask my students, because that will come up, and they will say scientists are in it for fame and fortune.
Yeah.
Great. Name a scientist, right? Now, especially prior to the pandemic, I'd get blank stares, and then they might go Einstein. Okay. Name one who's alive.
Yeah, right.
Maybe they could give me Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill
Hmm.
Nye, right? So, okay, what do you think we've learned here, right? And so we'll get to something like cancer, and they'll say, well, there's a conspiracy to hide the cure for cancer. Okay, let's pull at that thread. Even if we could have a cure for cancer, which is a biological impossibility, nevertheless, let's say that we could. Nearly everyone is touched by cancer. What would it take you to hide that? How much money would it take you to hide that? Now you realize if you came up with the cure for cancer, you'd win a Nobel, you'd be in textbooks for all of history, you'd have fame and fortune, right? What would keep you quiet?
Yeah.
Okay. If the cure for cancer is out there, somebody else is incentivized to find it. Are they going to keep quiet too? Or are they going to rat you out? So I guess I veered from um, fame and fortune to conspiracy, but to me, they're very closely aligned because
Hmm.
students don't tend to realize what the incentives are.
Right.
Most scientists that I know are driving Hondas, paying
Hmm.
off student loans, right? like
Yep.
they've got real world problems. They're people doing their best to try to explore an area that they find really fascinating. They want to make a difference. They're not conspiring for some, like, they're not making big money to keep some sort of secret from you.
Right. And by making a difference, that could be finding out some very niche information that no one has thought about before that is not going to do anything regarding fame or fortune, but maybe a handful of people in some journal will find interesting, and that's their big moment. Is because yeah, it's the intrinsic motivation, right? It's like a lot of scientists are just very curious people. They want to learn how something works, and that's why they study science. That's why they're in the lab tinkering away studying this thing, and that's really cool. I think it's great that we have people like that are really interested in these nuanced, detailed information that they want to dive into. And yeah, but like a lot of stuff's like pretty boring to most people. Studying what like molecules and how viruses work. And these are people that like comprise the scientific enterprise about like vaccine stuff. Is like a bunch of these nerds who are just studying molecules, and then collectively you have all these nerds like yelling at each other through academic journals, and that's how we can know that vaccines work.
Yes. Yes. And I love nerds. Nerds rule. Did you? Okay, I'm going to probably make myself. If you don't like it, please don't judge me. Big Bang Theory. Oh my God, I love Big Bang Theory. There is an
Okay.
episode. I know. I actually, I got into Big Bang Theory. My husband and I went to Venezuela.
Okay.
And it was so incredibly dangerous. We went to Caracas, and our host told us, you're going to go into your room, your hotel, you're going to lock your door behind you, and you're not going to open it again until the morning when we come back and get you. And so we had our like canned food and like all of our non-perishables in there, and there was one television channel that showed anything in English, and it played Big Bang Theory on like constant repeat. By the time we left, we were absolutely hooked. Nevertheless, there is one episode where they are presenting their findings at a conference, and they have a disagreement, and they're on stage like fighting it out, like duking it. They're like, is this what most conferences look like? Well, maybe not quite this bad, but yeah, okay.
Hmm.
People don't realize how much scientists like to disagree.
Yeah.
They love it.
Right.
If I can prove you wrong, that's awesome, right? I may not actually get glee doing it, but I might. And the point is, like, we are trying to get to a truth. And if I can prove you wrong and make a name for myself in the process, that's how it works. It's not oh, you said that? Sure, I'll go along with that. Anyone who's ever been around scientists knows that's not how it works.
Yeah, and that speaks to the point we've been talking about is like if you don't have experience in that world and how scientists love to fight with each other, you might think, oh, they're all just gonna kind of go along and get money from big pharma or something, even though most of us don't have anything to do with big pharma at all. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's this internal incentive to be correct within that context, and like the name you're making for yourself might be you're getting the respect of like a few people in your field. Like you're not getting international acclaim, you're not getting a ton of money. It's just like there's a few people that are like, oh, that guy's pretty smart, like he figured out this question that someone else didn't realize, and like that drives people. Their entire academic ego is a couple people who have studied this thinking, oh, you did a good job in this one thing, and that drives them. Or even maybe sometimes people don't even care about what other people think. They just think, I know what I'm doing, and as long as I'm correct and I'm being, validated by other people, that makes me feel good because I use them as self checks for my own process. It's very much outside the, like, so many scientists are introverts. They don't want to be famous. Like it's a whole other thing.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's an important thing to constantly mention. And it's a frustrating process being in academia where very slowly we're trying to be more accepting of outreach. So I guess as we kind of wrap up about things you're working on now and in the future, I'm curious about that process, like from your college and your department. Like, were they supportive of you doing this kind of outreach? Was there like forward, what like what's next as far as like reaching people in your science communication critical thinking journey?
Yeah. So my college has been very supportive.
Mm-hmm.
They supported me. Actually, I've been on leave for a couple of years to write a field guide to misinformation, which will
Great.
be out next year. Fingers crossed.
Awesome.
But I do think it was time to move past. So I'm still not sure how to say these words out loud because they kind of scare the poo out of me. But I have resigned from my full-time position, and I'm going to continue to adjunct. I love that course. It
Mm-hmm.
is the backbone of most of my science communication. And so I'm going to keep doing that. I do have to say, it kind of breaks my heart to see other academics not have this kind of support. Like, I know, for example, that I've given my curriculum to other faculty members at Research Ones, and they have not been allowed to teach this kind of content. There's a strain in academia that unfortunately seems resistant to changing science education. And I think it's a shame because we make a lot of assumptions about what it is that we're teaching. I know we love our fields and we want people to understand our fields and love our fields as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best kind of education for citizens. And so that's why I have also decided to leave my position and start to do science communication and critical thinking communication full time. I love speaking. I do a lot of speaking engagements and working with educators. Like, I design curriculum for educators, especially related to misinformation. And I feel so strongly about this kind of science and critical thinking education that I'm just going to explore it. I have no idea where this is going to go, but I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a huge need for it. So I'm glad you're going that direction. And I'm curious if you can share, yeah, the general idea behind your book project and kind of like what you want to dive into next.
So the book is a field guide to misinformation, and it's an exploration of the broad types of misinformation, everything from like scams to propaganda to pseudoscience and conspiracy theories, and why we fall for misinformation. And it uses the same approach that I take in my classes, which is generally non-triggering. I try really hard not to use, this is a fine line I'm walking in. I totally understand that it's a hard thing, and I don't know what the right way is. It's just the way that I've decided to do it. Misinformation, if it's the kind of misinformation that you tend to fall for, it is often triggering and people get defensive and they don't want to change their mind. They're not open. So I use a lot of non-triggering examples. Misinformation is a really touchy subject. There's a lot of really harmful misinformation. But I also know that if I try to address misinformation with things like climate change and evolution, like the biggies, then it's going to turn some people off. And so the book takes the approach of teaching the skills through a non-triggering process and also compares misinformation to reliable information. So with like fake news, and I'm air quoting here because that term is basically meaningless, but things like propaganda and fabricated content, I mean, there's various types of it, even satire or native ads. All of those are like, we fall for them because of how they work and how we fall for them. But I take a broad approach in terms of the different types of misinformation and then address how reliable information, let me say that again, what reliable information looks like. So here's what journalism is. A lot of people don't know basic terms like commentator or pundit or op-ed. So if I'm trying to help somebody understand what propaganda looks like, there's logical fallacies involved, there's various rhetorical techniques, but also what does more reliable information look like? And also with science, there's science denial and pseudoscience, but what does reliable science information look like? And actually, why is science reliable to begin with? So the book takes this broad approach in terms of the types of misinformation and comparing it to reliable information. I am an educator, at heart. And so I love the kinds of classroom activities that I've designed around the kinds of misinformation. And I want to do more of that and work with educators to help them use this content in class. Educators have their plates full. They have so much to do. They have standards to teach you. And a lot of times those standards don't even include misinformation. Like in science, they don't include misinformation. And if you're a science educator and you want to include this kind of stuff, you don't know what pseudoscience is. Like you've never been taught explicitly how to identify something like science denial, how it works, or how pseudoscience works, or what conspiracy theories are. So making that energy of activation low enough so that educators have the kinds of backgrounds where they feel comfortable with these topics, and then providing fun and engaging activities where students can explore them and learn how those techniques work.
Awesome. Great. So if people want to if people want to follow you online, where can they follow you? What websites and social media do you use?
My website is thinkingispower.com, and my platforms, Facebook. I know you're on Instagram. I don't understand Instagram. I'm trying very hard on Instagram.
I think you're good at Instagram. Yeah.
Thank you. I really don't get it. TikTok and YouTube, all at Thinking Powers. And yeah, I think that's it.
Great. Awesome. Well, Melanie, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
It was so nice to finally meet you, and I can't wait to read your book. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.